Hi, my name's Sarah, and I'm here to talk to you about chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, in football players. Although not every household watches football, according to Michael Pasternak's blog on StatScore, 112 million individuals tune in for a regular season game, and that jumps up to 167 million households during the Super Bowl in 2019. So what if I told you that this sport could cause its players to have a reduced quality of life? I'm sure this still wouldn't reduce the number of people that watch it. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is caused by continuous concussions or brain trauma. It causes symptoms of dementia, and research is not very far along on how to lower the instances of concussions in these professional athletes. I myself watch football almost every week, mostly due to the fact that my best friend plays on the LA Rams, but also because it's been a huge part of my family, just like biology has. And in my first year of undergrad, I did a 10-page research paper to understand why CTE is caused, and I'm going to explain that to you today. So right now, I will discuss the definition of a concussion and the frequency it occurs in football players every season, the symptoms of CTE and why that's tied to dementia, and finally, the research being done to prevent CTE in professional football players. First, I'll explain what happens to the brain during a concussion and the frequency this occurs. So to start off, I'm going to talk about the T in CTE, or traumatic, and how the frequency of concussions lead to worsening inflammation and atrophy later in life. According to the CDC, a concussion is a traumatic brain injury that occurs when there is a blow to the head that causes the brain to bounce around in the skull, leading to chemical changes and damage to brain cells. The skull is supposed to work as a protective barrier for the brain, but when a concussion happens, the brain sloshes around in the skull, and the skull ends up being the one to do the damage, causing inflammation. Concussions don't always result in the individual losing consciousness. According to the same study by the CDC, only 10% of concussions lead to a person going unconscious. That low 10% makes it hard for coaches to understand just how often their players may sustain a concussion. The effects of a concussion may take days or even years to notice. In an interview Bill Littlefield had with Ben Utecht, a former tight end player, Utecht reported that with only 5 diagnosed concussions during his career, he couldn't remember every time he was injured and only remembered it when he was watching the playbacks. He also couldn't remember other important moments in his life, such as his best friend's wedding that he was a groomsman in. In a study of head injuries done by Melissa Locker, there were only 281 reported concussions in preseason games and practices in 2017. Many concussions go unnoticed or unreported. If you've ever watched a game of football and you see how much tackling happens, 281 seems like a small number compared to all of the tackles where the players hit their head. Now that I've explained what happens during a concussion and how often they occur, I'm going to explain CTE and how its symptoms present itself as early onset dementia. CTE presents itself similarly to early onset dementia. If you've ever been close to somebody that has dementia, it's hard on the individual to be confused all the time, but it's even harder on their family members because there's almost nothing that they can do. CTE is defined by the Journal of Neuropathology and Experimental Neurology as a disease that is associated with memory disturbances, behavioral and personality changes, Parkinson's, and speech and gait abnormalities. The continuous concussions result in protein tangles throughout several parts of the brain, but especially in the superficial cortical layers, or the layers that have the most inflammation during impact because that's where it gets hit by the skull. In that same journal on head injuries, of individuals that obtain concussions, 17% of them develop CTE. Researchers are still trying to determine what about concussions cause CTE, but this question is hard to answer because, much like Alzheimer's, CTE cannot be distinguished from dementia until the person has died and they can test their brain for those specific proteins. Dementia is a generalized term for a decrease in memory. In 2017, Boston Healthcare System and Boston University conducted a study on 111 brains from former NFL players, and 110 of those brains were found to have CTE. That's 99%. The commonalities of dementia and CTE are memory problems, changes in personality and behavior, depression, and gait problems. Alzheimer's dementia does not have a cause or a cure, but since CTE is tied to head trauma, there is research being done to lead to a possible way to reduce the damage players inflict on their brains. Finally, I'm going to inform you of the research being done to lessen concussions. Once researchers determined that CTE is caused by concussions, Sam Browd, a neurosurgeon behind the idea of viscus, along with a mechanical engineer professor at the University of Washington, Per Reinhall, came up with the idea of the helmet 01. 01's helmet is a shock absorber that bends upon impact, and the inner layer acts like memory foam. This helmet adds more time to the impact, which decreases the acceleration of the brain and decreases the force of impact on the brain. The creators of 01 wanted to be clear that there is still no proof that reducing the force of impact would reduce the chances of someone getting CTE. Researchers have commented on the bias of testing these helmets, stating that research is non-randomized, has selection bias, and over-reliance on subject reconciliation. The concussion tests are being given by the coaches, and when you're a coach, you don't want your players to be sitting out on the bench, which leads to players going back with a concussion and having a chance of getting another concussion before the first one is healed. So the occurrence of CTE is even higher in professional football players. The only true way to lower the chance of CTE is by taking tackling out of the game. But not as many people are going to tune in if football players stop tackling each other and start using the two-hand touch. And until a helmet is manufactured and tested unbiasedly, we won't see a decrease in the amount of CTE. Now that I have informed you about what happens to the brain during a concussion and the frequency of concussions, how CTE is tied to dementia and the research being done, I'm going to summarize what I explained once more. American football is a highly watched sport by millions of Americans each year, and the players sustain a high amount of concussions. These concussions lead to CTE and cognitive disabilities with individuals. The research being done is too biased to understand if it is making any impacts to decrease the occurrence of CTE. So next time you find yourself watching football, I hope you keep this in the back of your mind. I'm not telling you to stop watching football, but just know that with every good thing, there are possible negative impacts. Thank you.